The first encounter. Sarah had never expected to feel this way on Earth. As she stepped off her ship, her boots made a soft thud on the cracked pavement of the bustling city. The air was thick with sounds and smells, unlike anything she had encountered in the countless planets she had visited. Humans were strange, chaotic, and unpredictable, yet there was something different about them. She had come here to study, to observe, but the moment she landed, she felt a rush of curiosity mixed with something else, something almost magnetic. Her mission was clear: gather information on Earth's inhabitants, specifically their human warriors, and report back to her superiors. But Sarah wasn't a soldier. She was a diplomat. She had learned how to read alien species, how to communicate without words, how to influence without force. This mission was supposed to be easy. Get in, learn about the humans, and leave. No complications. But Earth had a strange way of defying expectations. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. Sarah adjusted the collar of her uniform, her alien technology glimmering faintly beneath the fabric. Her people, the Zecarians, were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and intelligence, but they had never faced anything like humanity before. They were curious, yes, but also prone to violence. She had been briefed on Earth's history, wars, suffering, survival. Yet there was something in her gut that told her Earth wasn't just a planet full of chaos. There was something else, something hidden deep beneath the surface. And then she saw him. Lucas. He stood at the corner of a busy street, waiting for the light to change. His dark hair caught the last rays of the setting sun, and his eyes, those deep, dark eyes, seemed to hold an entire universe of untold stories. Sarah's gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, everything else faded. The sounds of the street, the people rushing past, even the air itself seemed to disappear. All that remained was him, this strange human who seemed so ordinary. But Sarah knew better than to trust appearances. She had studied humans in her briefings. They could be deceptive, unpredictable. Her task was clear: observe, report, and return. Taking a step forward, she made her way toward him, her boots clicking against the pavement with purpose. Lucas didn't notice her approach at first. He was too busy staring at the screen of his device, his focus entirely absorbed in whatever was happening on the tiny screen in his hands. Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation as she drew closer. Her mission was about to begin. And yet, something in her was uneasy. Her people didn't form attachments to other species. They didn't get emotionally tangled up in the lives of those they observed. But as she stood just a few feet away from Lucas, she felt a pull, a strange, unexplainable pull. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice cool and composed, but inside, her heart raced. It was her first time speaking to a human. Would he understand her? Would he react with fear, as so many others did when they saw her alien appearance? Lucas looked up from his screen, his eyes briefly scanning her figure. There was no sign of fear, only curiosity. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long before he offered a small, polite smile. "Hey," he said casually, his voice warm. "Can I help you?" Sarah froze for a moment. She hadn't expected him to be so calm. Humans were often unpredictable, and their reactions to aliens could range from hostility to fascination. But this human, seemed unbothered. There was no fear in his expression, no surprise, just a simple curiosity that mirrored her own. "I'm here to learn about your world," Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was happening, it felt different. "I need to understand more about your people." Lucas raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "My people? Well, I'm just one guy, but I can help with whatever you need." Sarah was taken aback by his response. He wasn't acting like the others she had encountered in her travels. He wasn't fearful or suspicious. Instead, he seemed open. It was strange, almost as if he were genuinely interested in helping her. For a moment, she hesitated. Should she continue? Was this part of some human game, some tactic to test her, to see how far they could push before she reacted? But no, this wasn't a test. Lucas wasn't like the others. There was something in his eyes, something honest and kind, that made Sarah feel vulnerable. She hadn't expected that. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice softer now. "I come from far away." "Sarah," he repeated, as if savoring the sound of her name. He didn't seem to mind her alien appearance at all. "I'm Lucas, and if you want to know more about Earth, I'd be happy to show you around. But can I ask why you're so interested in humans? Most aliens don't really care about us." His question caught her off guard. Why was she interested in humans? She had a mission, yes, but there was more to it now. Something inside her was drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been taught that humans are unpredictable. But there's something about you, something I can't quite explain." Lucas's smile widened, and he took a step closer. "Well, I guess we all have a lot to learn about each other, don't we?" The moment he spoke, Sarah felt it, a spark. A strange, unexpected pleasure washed over her, like a current of warmth flowing through her body. Her breath hitched, and for a split second, she couldn't focus on anything else. The sensation was powerful, overwhelming, and completely unlike anything she had ever felt before. She quickly stepped back, her mind racing. What had just happened? Why had his words, his presence, affected her like that? She wasn't supposed to feel anything for humans, not like this. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked, his voice laced with concern. He stepped forward, sensing something was wrong. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. The pleasure had left her speechless, and she could only wonder, was it him, or was it something deeper? Something about her, something about humans, that she had yet to understand. Her mission had just become far more complicated than she ever imagined. The unexpected pleasure. The next day, Sarah couldn't shake the strange feeling that had consumed her when she first met Lucas. She had traveled across galaxies, observed countless alien species, and experienced various cultures, but nothing had ever left her feeling the way this human had. She told herself it was just a fluke, a momentary lapse in her control, but deep down, she knew it was something more. She had come to Earth on a mission to learn, but now she was learning something she hadn't anticipated. As she walked through the crowded streets of the city, the noise and chaos of human life seemed to blur around her. Cars honked in the distance, people shouted to one another, and the scent of street food filled the air. Yet, all Sarah could think about was Lucas. Why did she feel this pull toward him? What was it about him that made her feel so vulnerable? She had dealt with diplomats, generals, and rulers from all over the galaxy. None of them had ever made her feel this way. The more she thought about it, the more the sensation gnawed at her. She had tried to avoid him, thinking that maybe it was just a passing reaction, but she couldn't stay away. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. His deep brown eyes, his easy smile, the way he had looked at her with such curiosity, not fear. Humans were supposed to be full of uncertainty, but Lucas seemed different. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her communicator buzzing. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the device, trying to push aside the distracting emotions swirling inside her. "Sarah," came the voice of her superior, Commander Vex. "How is your mission progressing? Have you gathered sufficient information on the human species?" She straightened her posture, instantly reverting to her professional demeanor. "I have made some progress, Commander," she replied. "The humans are unlike anything I have encountered before. They are unpredictable, yes, but there is something else about them, something I need to understand." "You're becoming too attached," Vex warned. "Remember your objective. You were not sent to form emotional bonds. Do not forget that." Zara's jaw tightened at the reprimand, though she knew he was right. She wasn't supposed to form any emotional connections. She was a diplomat, not an explorer of feelings. But what if this was different? What if there was something to be learned here that was beyond her training? As if on cue, her eyes were drawn to a familiar figure across the street. Lucas. He was standing near a food vendor, laughing with some friends, his laughter carrying across the busy street. For a brief moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. It was as though she were the only one in the city who could hear that sound, as though it pulled her in like a magnet. Zara's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly turned away, reminding herself that this wasn't part of her mission. She had to stay focused. She couldn't let herself get distracted by a human, especially one who seemed to stir up such strange feelings inside her. But as the hours passed, the urge to see him again became overwhelming. She knew it was foolish, but she couldn't ignore the pull. There was something in the air, something in the way the world seemed to shift when Lucas was near her. It was as though a current ran between them, something powerful, something neither of them could explain. Later that evening, she found herself walking through the park where she had first met him. Her pace quickened with each step, the anticipation building in her chest. What was she doing? Why was she allowing herself to be pulled into this unknown? And then there he was again, standing by a bench, alone this time. His back was to her, but she could feel his presence as though he had been waiting for her. Without thinking, Zara walked toward him, her footsteps soft against the grass. "Lucas," she called, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. He turned around, a look of pleasant surprise crossing his face when he saw her. "Zara, didn't expect to see you again so soon. What's up?" She swallowed, trying to find her words. This wasn't part of her plan. She wasn't supposed to get caught up in human emotions, especially not with a person who was nothing more than an assignment. But the words spilled out of her before she could stop them. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," she said, almost in a whisper. I don't understand why. But every time I'm near you, I feel something. Something strange. Something I can't explain." Lucas's smile softened, and he stepped closer. "I felt it too," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I wasn't sure what it was, but when we first met, there was something different. It's like we connect on a level I didn't think was possible." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that, to feel the same way. Was this what she had been feeling? Was this the connection she couldn't ignore? Could humans and aliens really feel the same thing across the vast distance of space and culture? But before she could respond, Lucas took a step closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. He was close now, too close. Zara's heart raced, and that feeling, the one that had plagued her since their first encounter, returned, stronger this time. It was more than just a spark. It was a fire, spreading through her body, making her feel alive in ways she never had before. Without thinking, Zara reached out, her hand brushing against his. The moment their skin touched, it was as though the world tilted on its axis. A rush of warmth surged through her, so powerful it made her dizzy. It was like nothing she had ever felt, like all the emotions she had kept buried for so long suddenly burst to the surface, raw and untamed. She pulled her hand back quickly, her mind reeling from the intensity of it all. What was happening to her? This was a human. She was a Zicarian, and humans were supposed to be beneath her. But now, in the presence of Lucas, nothing made sense. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, his voice laced with concern. "You look different." Zara didn't know how to respond. How could she explain this? How could she explain the pleasure that had coursed through her body just from touching him? Was this something all humans could do? Was this connection real, or was it a trick her mind was playing on her? I don't know," she whispered. "I'm not sure what's happening." Lucas reached out again, this time gently taking her hand in his. The moment they touched, that same wave of pleasure crashed over her again, and this time she didn't pull away. She let it wash over her, surrendering to the sensation. For the first time in her life, She didn't want to fight it. In that moment, Sarah realized that this mission was no longer about observation. It was about something far more complicated and far more dangerous. She was being drawn into something she couldn't control, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she even wanted to. The storm of desire. The following days were a whirlwind for Sarah. She tried to keep her focus on the mission, but everything around her seemed to revolve around Lucas. Their encounter in the park was only the beginning. Every time she saw him, that strange pull, that electric connection, surged through her again. It was becoming impossible to ignore. She knew she had to stay focused on her objective, to learn more about the humans, to gather intel, but her mind kept drifting back to him. And every time it did, that sensation of pleasure washed over her once again. Sarah had always been in control of her emotions. She was trained for this, to be detached, to stay professional. But with Lucas, it was different. She couldn't explain it. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that it was just an anomaly. But deep down, she knew it was something more, something undeniable. That evening, after another long day of observation, Sarah found herself walking the streets of the city, her mind racing. The air was thick with the scent of nighttime street vendors, and the neon lights from nearby signs flickered and flashed in every color imaginable. Humans bustled around her, unaware of the alien diplomat in their midst, lost in their own worlds. But she wasn't lost in the crowd. She was lost in him. She had tried to keep her distance, but the pull was becoming too strong. It was like a magnet, drawing her in no matter how hard she tried to resist. So, despite every logical part of her mind screaming to stay away, Sarah found herself heading toward the same park where they had first met. The park where she had felt the pull of something deeper than she was prepared for. And there he was again. Lucas stood beneath a street lamp, his face illuminated by its soft glow. He was alone, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, staring off into the distance, as if waiting for something or someone. The moment Sarah laid eyes on him, she felt that familiar rush of warmth, that surge of strange energy that had been haunting her for days. She couldn't stay away. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached him, her boots clicking softly against the pavement. Lucas turned at the sound, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of surprise and something more, something she couldn't quite place. "Sarah," he greeted her, his voice calm but with a hint of curiosity, as if he had been expecting her. She didn't speak at first, her gaze locked onto his, unable to look away. She could feel the heat of his presence, the steady thrum of her heartbeat in her chest. It was as if the entire world had faded away, and there was only him. Only this human who had somehow wrapped himself around her mind, her heart, and now her body. "What are you doing here?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas tilted his head slightly, studying her with those deep brown eyes. "I was waiting for you," he said, his tone gentle but certain. "I figured you'd come eventually." Sarah's breath hitched at his words. He had been waiting for her. Was he feeling this too? She had always thought of herself as someone who could control situations, who could keep her emotions in check. But standing here with him, that control was slipping away, and it terrified her. "I don't understand," Kara murmured, her voice tinged with confusion and longing. "Why do I feel this way when I'm near you? Why does it feel so powerful? It's like I can't think, I can't focus. I've never felt anything like this." Lucas took a step closer, his face softening with understanding. "I don't know, Sarah," he admitted, his voice low. "But it's the same for me. I don't know what it is, but every time I'm around you, I feel this pull, like we're connected. And when we're not together, it feels like something's missing. I can't explain it either." Zara's heart skipped a beat. He was saying the same thing she had been thinking. They were both caught in this strange, magnetic force, drawn to one another despite all logic. But this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about a human. She had a mission to complete, and this confusion, was getting in the way. "I don't know what this is, Lucas," Sarah said, her voice trembling now, a mix of frustration and desire. "I can't keep focusing on this. I have a job to do. I came here to observe, to learn about your people. But now all I want to do is stay close to you. And I don't understand why." Lucas stepped forward again, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was like fire, sending a shock through Sarah's body that made her gasp. "It's okay," Lucas said softly, his voice full of understanding. "We don't have to understand everything. Maybe we're not meant to. Maybe we're just meant to experience this, whatever it is." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to giving in to her emotions. She wasn't used to letting someone else control her feelings. But Lucas wasn't just anyone. He was the human who had somehow captured her heart, her mind, her very soul in a way no one else ever had. Before she could stop herself, Sarah leaned in closer, her lips just inches from his. The world around them seemed to disappear, and all she could focus on was the heat of his skin, the scent of him, the raw, magnetic energy between them that she couldn't fight any longer. But as she moved closer, something inside her hesitated. She couldn't let this happen. Not like this. "I can't. I shouldn't," she whispered, her voice breaking with a mix of fear and desire. Lucas's eyes softened. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said, his voice soothing but filled with a quiet intensity. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Take your time. We have all the time in the world to figure this out." Sarah closed her eyes, torn between the urge to give in to the heat between them and the need to stay rational. But in that moment, she realized something. The connection between them wasn't something she could control, something she could suppress. It was there, raw and undeniable. And no matter how much she tried to push it away, no matter how hard she fought it, she wanted it. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes and found Lucas's gaze locked onto hers, his face inches from hers, waiting for her to make the next move. Sarah knew, in that moment, that she had already made her decision. This wasn't about control. This was about surrender. And for the first time in her life, she was willing to give in. The temptation of the unknown. Sarah had never felt so lost in her life. Each time she saw Lucas, the world around her blurred into nothingness. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, but the pull between them was like gravity, constant and inescapable. She had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to stay focused on the task at hand. But here, with Lucas, that focus was slipping away faster than she could handle. Days passed in a haze of confusion. The mission that had once been so clear, so simple, was now muddled with her emotions. She couldn't stop thinking about Lucas, and she hated herself for it. Yet, a part of her couldn't bring herself to care. She wanted to know more about him, to feel more of that strange connection, to surrender to the feelings that were now consuming her. The temptation of the unknown was a powerful force. She didn't understand what was happening, but the desire to explore it was growing stronger with each passing moment. On the fourth night, after another long day of observing the humans, Sarah found herself walking the city streets once more. The air was thick with the sounds of traffic and chatter, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on Lucas. It was as if her every thought, every breath, was tied to him. She reached the park, the same place where their paths had crossed for the first time. But this time, something was different. It wasn't the same quiet, calm evening it had been before. The air was charged with an energy that Sarah couldn't ignore. She could feel it, like an electric current running through her veins. And she knew that Lucas was somewhere nearby. As she walked deeper into the park, she found him standing by the fountain, his back to her. He was staring into the flowing water, his hands resting casually at his sides. He didn't seem to notice her approach, but Sarah's heart raced as she neared him. She wasn't sure what she was doing, but she couldn't stop herself. Every step she took seemed to draw her closer to him, like she was being pulled by an invisible force. When she stood just behind him, he turned, his eyes locking onto hers immediately. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the tension of everything unsaid. "I knew you'd come," Lucas said, his voice soft but steady. "You always do." Zara's breath caught in her throat. There was something in his words, in the way he said them, that made her feel as though he understood her in a way no one ever had. He wasn't just waiting for her physically. It was like he knew what was happening between them, the force they couldn't fight, the attraction that defied reason. And that made everything feel so much more dangerous. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Why does it feel like this? I don't understand. I can't control it." Lucas stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the best way. He wasn't invading her space, but it felt like his mere proximity was a challenge to her control. The air between them was thick with anticipation, with a question neither of them could answer. "Because we can't control this," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, as if afraid that saying it out loud might shatter something. "But that doesn't mean we shouldn't experience it." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. He was right. She couldn't control it. But the desire to try, to give in, was too strong to ignore any longer. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. The touch sent a wave of heat coursing through her, and she nearly lost herself in the sensation. It was as though every nerve in her body was alive, every inch of her skin sensitive to the barest touch. Her fingers lingered on his skin, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to fade. It was just the two of them, caught in a storm of emotions neither of them fully understood. But it didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. The temptation to give in, to let herself fall into whatever this was too great. "I don't know if I can stop myself," Zara confessed, her voice low, almost a breath. "I don't know if I want to." Lucas's gaze softened, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. "You don't have to stop," he said, his voice barely audible. "You don't have to fight it. Just let it happen." Zara closed her eyes, a wave of warmth flooding her senses. She had never felt more alive, more vulnerable. Every part of her wanted to pull away, to run, to keep herself safe from the storm that was building between them. But another part of her, a part she hadn't recognized until now, was willing to surrender to it, to give herself over to this strange, powerful connection that neither of them could explain. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely a sound. Lucas nodded, his face so close to hers that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "I'm sure," he said, his voice firm, yet gentle. "You're not alone in this, Zara." And with those words, Zara let go. She leaned in, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a spark. It was as if the entire universe had conspired to bring them together, and in that moment, nothing else existed. All the confusion, all the fear, all the hesitation, it all disappeared. All that mattered was the feel of his lips against hers, the heat of his body, the electric connection that surged through them both. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them. The kiss deepened, and Zara could feel herself losing control, her mind spinning, her body alive with an intensity she had never known. She had always been taught to keep her distance, to never let anyone close enough to hurt her. But now, with Lucas, she couldn't think about the consequences. She could only think about the way he made her feel. The world around them continued to move, but Zara and Lucas were frozen in time, caught in a moment of pure, unfiltered desire. It was as if everything else faded away. Her mission, her duty, the alien world she had come from, all of it disappeared in the wake of their connection. When they finally broke the kiss, both of them were breathless. Zara's heart raced, and she could see the same fire in Lucas's eyes. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, his words a promise. Zara's heart pounded, a mix of excitement and uncertainty building within her. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The storm of desire had only just begun. A rush of forbidden desire. The days that followed were nothing like anything Sarah had ever experienced. The bond between her and Lucas had shifted from a quiet whisper to a powerful, undeniable force. Each time they were together, the air around them seemed to hum with energy. An energy that neither of them could control, but both were helplessly drawn to. Sarah knew she was walking a fine line. As an ambassador from her planet, she was supposed to be detached, rational, above the pull of human emotions. But the more time she spent with Lucas, the harder it became to remember her duties. She found herself seeking him out, craving his presence like an addict to a drug. And worse, she didn't want to stop. That night, as the city lights twinkled below, Sarah stood at her window, looking out over the bustling streets. The weight of her thoughts pressed heavily on her chest. She had been trained for diplomacy, for control. She had been taught to always put the mission first, to never let emotions cloud her judgment. But here, in this city, with Lucas, everything felt different. The connection they shared was a wildfire, impossible to contain, impossible to explain. And the more she tried to resist, the stronger it became. She had never felt anything like this, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to. Sarah. Lucas's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway of her apartment. His expression was a mixture of concern and something else, something deeper. It was the same look he had given her the first time they had met, the one that made her heart skip a beat. "Lucas," she said, her voice a little breathless. "I didn't expect you." He shrugged, stepping closer. "I couldn't stay away. I need to see you. I need to understand what this is between us." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as he crossed the room and stood just a few feet from her. The closeness of his presence was overwhelming. His eyes were fixed on hers, and for a moment she wondered if he could hear the frantic beating of her heart. "I don't know what this is either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But every time I try to push it away, it only gets stronger. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that it doesn't matter." "You don't have to pretend anymore," Lucas said, his voice low and reassuring. "Whatever this is, we're in it together. You don't have to fight it." He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her cheek. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of heat rushing through her, and her breath hitched. She wanted to pull away, to remind herself of her mission, of her responsibilities. But the truth was, she didn't want to. She didn't want to fight this feeling anymore. Without another word, Lucas closed the gap between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was different from all the others. It wasn't just a kiss of longing or desire. It was a kiss of surrender, of shared understanding. Sarah felt herself melting into him, her hands reaching up to grasp the sides of his shirt, as though he were the only thing anchoring her to this reality. The kiss deepened, and with it, the flood of emotion she had been suppressing for so long burst free. She felt alive in a way she never had before, her body trembling with anticipation. She could feel his heartbeat against hers, his pulse as erratic as her own. The sensation of being so close to him was intoxicating, and her mind began to spin, thoughts and feelings mixing in a whirlwind of desire. Her body was responding to him in ways she couldn't control, and for the first time, she didn't want to. "I've wanted this from the moment I saw you," Lucas murmured against her lips, his hands tracing the curve of her back. Zara's breath caught. She had been so focused on the mission, so determined to stay distant, but now all she could think about was him. The way he made her feel. The way his touch set every nerve in her body alight. "I don't know if I can stop this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I want to." His lips ghosted over her skin, sending a shiver of anticipation racing through her. "You don't have to stop," he breathed. "You don't have to fight it. Let me show you." Without warning, he lifted her into his arms, and Sarah gasped, her body instinctively wrapping around him. Her heart raced as he carried her toward the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. She was lost in the intensity of his gaze, the depth of emotion she could see reflected in his eyes. When he laid her down, Sarah felt a strange sense of vulnerability. But it wasn't fear. It was trust. Trust in him, in what they were about to share. The tension between them was electric, charged with anticipation, and Sarah couldn't deny the way her body was already reacting. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her own hands were already sliding over his chest, eager to feel the warmth of his skin. Lucas nodded, his lips brushing lightly over hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And then they came together once more, the world outside fading into nothingness. There was no mission. There were no rules. There was only them, the electric pull between them, the rush of forbidden desire that neither of them could fight anymore. In that moment, Sarah understood. This was not just a connection. It was a union. A meeting of two worlds, of two beings who were never meant to cross paths, yet somehow fate had brought them together. And there was no turning back. As their bodies moved together, the intensity of their passion grew, each kiss, each touch, each whisper carrying them deeper into the storm of desire they had both been trying to resist. But now, in this moment, all they wanted was to feel, to experience, to surrender. And for Sarah, there was no greater freedom than this. Bound by desire, Sarah woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. Her body felt light, yet every muscle hummed with the echoes of the night before. She turned to the side, her breath catching in her chest as she saw Lucas, still asleep beside her. The way he lay there, his features softened in the quiet of the morning, made her heart race, not with the intensity of passion, but with something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The night had changed everything. Their bodies had merged, but something had shifted within her too. There was no denying it now. She was no longer just an ambassador from another world. She was a woman who had given herself over to a feeling she didn't fully understand, to a connection that defied logic. Zara slowly pushed herself up, careful not to wake him. She needed space, time to think. Her hand instinctively reached for the necklace she always wore, the emblem of her people. It was a reminder of the duty she had sworn to uphold, the mission she had promised to complete. But now, that promise seemed so distant, so irrelevant. She moved to the window and looked out over the city below. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had stepped off her ship, a stranger to this world. But now she felt like she belonged in a way that terrified her. She had given herself to Lucas, not just physically, but emotionally, and she didn't know how to take it back. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of movement behind her. Lucas had woken up and was standing at the doorway, his expression unreadable. He walked toward her with his usual calmness, but his eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "You're up early," he said, his voice low, a trace of sleep still lingering in his tone. "I needed to think," Sarah replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Last night, it was more than just what we felt. There's something between us, Lucas, something I can't ignore anymore. But I don't know if I can stay. I have responsibilities." Lucas stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. His hand reached out, gently resting on her shoulder, sending a spark of warmth through her skin. "You don't have to choose between us and your mission," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to abandon everything. I'm just asking you to stay, to give us a chance. Can't we figure this out together?" Zara turned to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were a balm to her soul, but they also reminded her of the danger they were in. The mission, the consequences, the unspoken rules that governed her kind. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My people, they won't tolerate this. If they find out about us, it could mean the end of everything I've worked for. My status, my position, everything. And it could mean the end of you too." Lucas' eyes darkened, but he didn't pull away. "Then let's face it together. Whatever happens, we're in this together, Sarah. I won't let you go through this alone." For a long moment, Sarah simply looked at him, her heart torn between her duty and the raw, undeniable bond she felt with him. She knew that staying would mean risking everything, her career, her future, even her people's trust. But walking away meant losing something she couldn't even name, something that had taken root deep within her soul. "I don't know if I can live with the consequences of this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if I can live without you either." Lucas reached for her, his hand cupping her face gently, his thumb brushing over her lips. "Then don't walk away. We'll face whatever comes together. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She had never been good at letting go, at allowing someone else to share her burden. But in that moment, something shifted within her. She didn't want to fight this anymore. She didn't want to hide from what they had. With a soft sigh, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's face it together. Whatever comes next." And just like that, the weight that had been pressing on her chest lifted, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she could breathe. The decision was made. No more hiding. No more pretending. They were in this, for better or worse. That evening, the two of them sat in silence, the tension in the air palpable. The time for decisions had passed, but the reality of what they were facing was far from clear. Sarah's people would never approve of her actions. The council would see it as a betrayal, a weakness, and yet in her heart, she knew it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about her, about them. Lucas had taken her hand, gently squeezing it, grounding her in the moment. She could feel his warmth, his determination, and for once, she didn't feel alone. He didn't need to say anything. He was there, and that was enough. But the uncertainty still lingered. They both knew the risks. The council would find out eventually. And when they did, the consequences would be devastating. Sarah's mind flashed with images of the alien fleet, her people's powerful forces ready to strike down any perceived weakness. Her heart clenched at the thought of what could happen to Lucas, to her. But at that moment, as she looked at Lucas, the man who had become so much more than a mission to her, she knew she wasn't ready to give him up. Not yet. Not without a fight. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice firm but soft, "we'll figure it out. Together." Lucas smiled, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. Together. Always. And in that moment, Sarah made a promise to herself, to Lucas, and to the universe. No matter what the future held, she wouldn't let fear or duty tear them apart. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, because this was real. This was worth fighting for. The final decision. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. For the past few days, Sarah and Lucas had tried to navigate the storm that was brewing, each moment together feeling more dangerous, more intense, as if the universe itself were conspiring to tear them apart. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She had made a promise to herself to stand by Lucas, no matter the consequences, but the weight of her people's expectations, her mission, and the rules she had sworn to follow all loomed over her, threatening to crush her. And now, they had come to the most critical moment of all. The council was on its way. They knew something had changed. They could feel it in the air, the whispers of betrayal, the subtle shifts in the galactic tides. Sarah had tried to keep her secret hidden, but no deception could last forever. Lucas stood by the window, his silhouette bathed in the soft glow of the fading sunset. The city outside seemed distant, almost unreal, as if the world they had once known had turned upside down. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of impending doom. "The council is coming, Sarah. They're not just bringing questions, they're bringing consequences." Sarah's heart raced. She knew the stakes. Her people would never forgive her for what she had done, for what she had become. If they discovered the truth about her relationship with Lucas, it wouldn't just cost her position. It could bring war. Her loyalty to her people was being tested in ways she never imagined. and the fear of what would happen to Lucas, what would happen to them both, gnawed at her insides. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. For a moment, it felt like everything was closing in around her, suffocating her with the weight of choices she could never undo. "I never thought it would come to this," Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "When I first arrived, I never imagined it would be this difficult. You were supposed to be a distraction, a momentary detour. But now," she hesitated, struggling to find the words. "Now, you're more than that. You've become everything to me." Lucas stepped toward her, his gaze intense. "And you've become everything to me, Sarah. This isn't just some fleeting thing. It's real. I never asked for any of this, but now I can't imagine my life without you. We have to face it. We have to face them, together." Sarah's throat tightened as she took a step back, trying to steady herself. She could feel the conflict swirling inside her. The duty to her people, the loyalty to her mission, battling with the raw, undeniable connection she had with Lucas. "But you don't understand, Lucas," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "If I stand by you, if I choose you over my mission, over everything I've ever known, I'm risking everything. I'm not just risking my life, but your life too. You'll be dragged into this war, and I can't bear the thought of you suffering because of me." Lucas reached out, cupping her face gently, his touch tender but firm. "If that's what it takes to be with you, then I'll face it. We'll face it together. Whatever they do, whatever they say, I'll stand by you. I won't let you go through this alone. We're not just fighting for us, we're fighting for the future. For something that doesn't have to be defined by war and duty." For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to believe in something other than the mission. The cold, logical side of her, the side that had been trained to think of her people above all else, began to crumble. She had spent so much time convincing herself that duty was everything, that her mission was the most important thing in the universe. But now, with Lucas standing before her, she realized that she couldn't live without him. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life any longer. "I've spent my entire life following orders," she whispered, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. "I've always done what was expected of me. But now, for the first time, I'm choosing for myself. I'm choosing us." Tears welled up in her eyes as the words left her lips. It wasn't just a promise. It was a declaration, a decision to fight for something she never thought possible, a future with Lucas. There was a knock at the door. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah and Lucas exchanged a look. It was time. "Are you ready?" Lucas asked quietly, his hand squeezing hers. "I don't know what's coming, but I'm ready to face it. With you," she said, her voice steady now. The storm inside her had calmed. She had made her choice. Together, they walked to the door, hand in hand. When Sarah opened it, she was greeted by a group of official representatives from her people. They wore expressions of suspicion, their eyes scanning the room with cold detachment. "Sarah of the Triumph Consortium," the leader of the group said, her tone formal and unyielding. "We have come to investigate the breach of protocol. There have been reports of unusual behavior. You will accompany us." Sarah stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I am not leaving, not until I have said my piece. The truth is, I am not just an ambassador anymore. I am a person with my own desires, my own future. And I've made my decision. Lucas is not just a distraction. He's my choice, and I will stand by him, no matter what." The silence that followed was thick with tension. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their authority challenged in a way they had never expected. But Sarah stood firm, her heart pounding, knowing that she was taking the first step toward a future that had once seemed impossible. And then, to her surprise, one of the council members stepped forward. He was older, his face worn by age and experience. But in his eyes, Sarah saw something different, something like understanding. "Perhaps," he said, his voice softer than before, "it is time for a change. The others fell silent, their skepticism and suspicion hanging in the air, but it was clear that something had shifted. The path ahead was uncertain, but Chara knew this was the first step toward forging a new future, one where she could be herself, without the chains of duty holding her back. As the council slowly retreated, Lucas squeezed her hand tighter, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle within her. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in her life, Chara knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was ready to face it. Together.